All right, good morning, and welcome to the OCIO learning session for the month. I am not Melanie Cohen, but I'm filling in for Melanie this morning, and she'll be back for the next session. Before I introduce our speaker this morning, a couple of administrative announcements. We have a sign-in sheet that's circulating, so make sure you get your name on that sign-in sheet so you get credit for the training. If you are watching this from the field via webcast, send an email to Melanie Cohen, and she'll assure that you get credit for the training. Secondly, we have a Wi-Fi hotspot set up here in the auditorium for those that want to tweet. The name of the hotspot is Charlie Sierra Delta CSD Wi-Fi, and the password is Charlie Sierra Delta Delta India Romeo 4276. And you'll see that also posted on a couple of the columns. Okay, so those that want to tweet, feel free to do that. So without further ado, let me introduce John O'Brien. He is an associate professor in information strategies at the National Defense University. He is an expert in performance management and public sector ethical competency, and we're incredibly fortunate to have him here again to explore part 2 of performance management. So John, thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you. Thank you very, very, very much. I'm very happy to be here. As Stan mentioned, this is part 2. Back in May of 2011, I was fortunate enough to come here and just give you a small taste of performance strategic planning and performance management. We talked a little bit about some of the components of what a strategic planning system is all about, and we're going to expand on that today, including such things as mission, vision, goals, objectives, and initiatives. I'm doing this because they want to film me. All right. Let's talk about the history. We can't talk about any kind of strategic planning approach or performance management without understanding where it came from. If you think performance management started yesterday, you're wrong. Performance management, accountability, and attempting to organize work in a strategic plan with holding people accountable has been around for quite some time. You could argue that it started, you could even argue it started with the Pendleton Act, 1887. What was the Pendleton Act? What did it create? Civil service. That's what you all are doing. It created your job. It was an attempt to take public management and public jobs out of a straight political situation and put it into a more managerial situation. It was probably our very first attempts at performance management. But I won't go back that far and tell you all the boring details of that. In the modern era, let's just start with, say, Kennedy and Johnson. Introduced under John F. Kennedy and primarily expanded upon by Lyndon Johnson, we have something called PPBS, Planning, Programming, Budgeting. Was that a strategic planning system? Yes. Performance management system. There was an attempt to say, tell us in very discrete terms what your long-range plans are, your 5-year POM cycle, develop the programs for that, and more importantly, tie the budget to it as well. Its biggest proponent was probably Robert McNamara, the Department of Defense, Secretary of Defense. Why? Because where did Bob McNamara come from? Anybody know? Ford. He came from the private sector. He was a very numbers-oriented person. Some would say he was a numbers geek. He was actually a lieutenant colonel in the Army Air Corps, and he did during World War II, and he did bomb assessment, damage control. He analyzed data for studying the efficiency and effectiveness of bombing campaigns. And he took that approach to Ford, and then he took it into the public sector. Now, I don't want to get into a big debate about was it good, was it bad. Certainly, one of the classic measures that came out of McNamara's era was body count. which was probably not a good measure to use. It was probably an erroneous measure, if you will, to determine whether we were winning a war. After all, what was the purpose of the Vietnam War? More or less, to win the hearts and minds of the people and protect from communism, et cetera, et cetera. Body count was a very narrow approach to determining that. But we're still struggling with that today, are we not? So, President Nixon followed that up with another alphabet soup, MBO, Management by Objectives. Again, trying to tie performance, trying to tie achievements, accountability into the actual objectives, if you will. Did that work? Who knows? Jury's still out. That was followed, of course, by another alphabet soup, ZBB, Zero-Based Budgeting, introduced by Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was a very, very, very good public administrator. He knew how to be a public manager, and he worked very, very well in lower level government areas, county government, state government. He was governor of Georgia and so forth. He got up on the federal level and he tried to introduce ZBB, and it ran into a few little political issues associated with it. Again, why? It was an attempt to try and tie budgeting into direct accountability. Your budget on 1 October was zero. Forget about what you had last year, and as opposed to the incremental budgeting that we're using now. And what do you intend to do with it, and how can you tie it in there? Ran into some political issues. Political issues permeate a lot of what we talk about with strategic planning and performance management. I put up on my slide there under Ronald Reagan, total quality management. That wasn't really a presidential initiative. Of course, that came out of Edward Deming. And I won't take a lot of time talking about TQM, other than just to say probably the most relevant topic from that for us here today was Deming's emphasis on customers. Who are your customers? That was tough. It was very, very tough for the public sector to answer, particularly from the world I came from, which is DOD. You might have a better sense of the fact that you have customers, but do the Marines have customers? Yeah, they kind of do, but it was very hard to get them to understand that. It was very hard to get them to go over that hurdle. I put TQM under the Reagan era because when Deming wrote his books, in the private sector, of course, who was the only one who really read them, truthfully? The Japanese. They read them. And they went after McNamara's hometown, basically, Detroit. And consequently, we had the Japanese invasion, if you will, in the 70s and the 80s of the auto industry, because they had a pretty good understanding. They had a much better understanding than we do about what our customer support was. What do people really want in cars, so forth and so on. Under the Clinton administration, certainly a Clinton/Gore initiative was NPR, the National Performance Review. That paralleled, if you will, GIPRA, which I'll talk about in a second. But what was the gist of the NPR? It was an attempt to make public sector work more like a private sector. Can the government work like the private sector? It was based on a book by Osborne and Gabler named Reinventing Government. In fact, that term, Reinventing Government, sort of became the mantle of the Gore plan. Can you make it be more efficient? Why is it that you can get a Burger King Whopper your way in 45 seconds or something like that, but it takes so long to get your driver's license renewed, and so forth and so on. So the gist of the Osborne and Gabler book and the gist of the NPR movement essentially was to say, why don't we try and incorporate private sector motives into the public sector? Finally, last one on our walk down memory lane, George W. Bush's President's Management Agenda. Now that's recent enough that some of you may have had to live under that, the 5 pillars of that, one of which was a linkage of budget and accountability, an attempt to try and ensure that there is some logic behind the work that you're doing and some results. the web page under the Bush administration that could sum it all up. It was www.results.gov. That's what they were driving after. Another little alphabet soup, which I don't have up there, but which came out of the Bush administration was PART. Remember PART? I see some smiles there. I love the way they turned that into a verb. Were you parted? Have you had to go through that? Basically, if you don't know what we're talking about, program assessment rating tool, it was a very arduous attempt to explain the mission, the vision, the goals, the objectives, et cetera, of this particular program, the budget, what are you trying to achieve from it, and so forth and so on. So, quick summary, a quick walk down memory lane and a summary of some of the historical foundations. And I guess I just want you to understand that this didn't happen just yesterday. Performance, an emphasis on performance and accountability didn't start in the Obama administration. Far be it. It started a long time ago. I mentioned that, am I doing this right? Having a problem with the slide. There we go. I mentioned under the Clinton administration a piece of legislation, a piece of public policy. Everything I've mentioned up to now, for the most part, has been executive branch initiatives, but certainly a piece of legislation that you should all be aware of if you're interested in this at all is GPRA, the Government Performance and Results Act. Was passed in '93. Tough piece of policy, not easy. It was so tough that the first 4 years of its past its enactment, it was done really just on a case-by-case experimentation basis, if you will, with just a few sites going through in an attempt to implement it and work out the growing pains. Approximately 24 sites were experimental sites for that. But it finally did go live in 1997. And basically the gist of GPRA is, thou shalt have 3 documents. Thou shalt have a strategic plan, thou shalt have a performance plan, and thou shalt have a performance report. I mean, did they not write strategic plans before 1993? Of course not. Of course, so they did write plans. Those were written, but GPRA was an attempt to formalize the process, if you will, to quantify it. GPRA was an attempt to say, you will write a plan, a strategic plan, that will have a concise mission statement, that will have strategic goals, that will have objectives, that will have performance measures associated with it, that will have some kind of a discussion of strategy, some kind of an approach toward strategic initiatives that are tied back to those goals. You will have a performance plan in which you will tell how you are going to measure these, what are the key measures that you will implement that will be able to allow you to answer those questions that the OMB is going to ask. And finally, a performance report comes out after the fact that basically tells you how you did it. GPRA, I could talk all day on this. GPRA has been hated and loved. There's quite a few people who are very critical of the law, saying it's not working out. It's been around now, again, live for about 14 years. But it is the law of the land. It has been amended now. How come every time I look up there I see my lovely face? It has been amended just recently in the year 2010 by the GPRA Modernization Act. GPRA Mod wasn't an attempt to radically change GPRA or override it. It was just an attempt to tighten up some of the holes. Specifically, again, we could hit many of them. I think probably the most important one I would say was the high priority performance goals. Agencies were tasked by OMB to tell of all the strategic goals that you might have in your plans, what are the ones, or what are derivations of the ones that can be done in a timely manner, that can be achieved in the next 12 to 18 months, that are the real punch, the real goals that your agency needs to focus upon. Again, an attempt to try and get results. It changed the time frame of the strategic plan now. It's a 4-year plan, and it's in sync with the presidential elections. In other words, the plan is developed, written, and implemented immediately after a new president comes in, and it's in place until the next election. And then probably the only thing I would mention would be the idea of performance improvement officers. Every agency has to have a PIO. Every agency has to have a go-to person, a button you would push. And of course, the government has a performance officer. Jeffrey Zients is the chief performance officer, has been put in place under the Obama administration. Actually, he was put in place before the passage of GIPRA-MOD, and leading the effort on this, all in an attempt to do what? To have accountability, to have transparency, to have a clear line of organization, a clear line of accountability all the way through. Okay? Now, I mentioned a couple of things in discussing GIPRA. Those terms were so important that I actually put them on a display here because I'm going to be referring back to them. GIPRA and I would go so far as to say any kind of robust strategic planning performance management system, whether you're on a federal level or if you're state and local and you're not necessarily following GIPRA, has to include these type of entities, these type of sections. You must have a mission statement. Now, I'm not going to get here and say to you, well, what's a good mission statement? Let's analyze 15 of them. We do that in our class. And you know what? We cuss and discuss for about 3 hours, and I think we still don't come up with the right answer because everybody's mission statement is different. But you have to accept the fact that if an organization is going to be viable, is going to be aggressive, is going to be a full-fledged organization, they've got to have a grasp of their mission statement. Why are you here? As I like to tell my students, the mission statement are all the words written down that tell people why they get out of bed every morning and drive the Beltway or drive 395 and come into work. If your employees and your customers, and I'm focusing more on the employees now, can't have a sense of a mission, then why do they come to work? And I don't want to hear, well, they come to work for a paycheck. I don't think so. I don't buy that. That's not, the studies have shown that's not the most important form of incentive. I think it's a sense of mission. I believe very strongly in the mission of the National Defense University. I like the organization. I like what we're trying to do there. We don't always succeed, but I understand it. I like the I-College. I think the whole concept of a vibrant mission is very, very important. That's really what GIPRA was trying to say. Again, I repeat myself, did people not write mission statements before 1993? Of course they did. But GIPRA was an attempt to say, let's all get on the same sheet of music and do it right. Interestingly enough, GIPRA, the law doesn't mandate a vision statement. It's not required. But the private sector typically picks up on the idea of a mission statement, and most people typically do. The difference between a mission statement and a vision statement is simple. The mission statement is today. The vision statement is where do you want to be in the future? Now, the way I teach it, and I get into some controversy here, I always have students say, I don't buy that. I propose it this way. The mission statement is that which endures, and the vision statement is that which changes. Let me repeat that. The mission statement is that which endures. The vision statement is that which changes. Why do I say it like that? I believe firmly that the mission statement of any organization has to be pretty solid, has to be pretty concise. Do I mean that it'll never change? Of course not. It'll change. It'll change on a periodic basis. New missions will come in, new customer bases. But if you're changing your mission statement as often as I change my socks or that Jerry Garcia tie, then something's wrong. Your employees are going to get a little confused, slightly schizophrenic. Where are we? What am I working for? What is this organization all about? I would argue the mission statement must be a little more solid. The vision statement, on the other hand, Okay, we know what those are. They're usually created by senior leadership. It's where we want the organization to go. Oftentimes they're created, and I say this very disrespectfully, oftentimes they're created because the senior leader takes an airplane flight, right, and picks up an in-flight magazine and says, oh, this is cool. We got to do this. And they come home and they've got we want to go here and implement this technology. Especially the CIOs have to deal with that kind of an issue. But that's okay, because that's what they're there for. The vision statement is always going to be constantly tweaking. You can never, I would never put a vision statement on a t-shirt and buy 10,000 copies of it, print up 10,000 copies, because it's probably going to change. Just my opinion. The goals, what are goals? We're talking strategic level goals now. They're derived typically from the mission statement. Could take a portion of them from the vision statement, but these are, again, very, very broad, high-level statements, not too many of what you're trying to accomplish. The objectives, now we're getting a little bit more specific. You're bringing it down. They're derived from the goals. You've seen all this. I mean, you understand it, basically. The objectives is where we start to measure. You measure to an objective. You can't measure to a goal. You certainly can't measure to a mission statement. It's hard to measure to a goal, but you measure to the objectives. The measures, what's a measure? It's what we're doing. It's just what, tell me what happened. In a highly discrete, quantitative, could be qualitative, but turned into at least a quantitative type of an approach, very specific determinant that we can track and we can ultimately measure performance of. Now the strategy, this is a funny word. What is strategy? It's what you're doing. I'm going to jump over the measures here. Strategy is what you're doing to meet those objectives. Your strategy is a broad term that you could use to mean strategic initiatives or plain initiatives. You could use it to mean activities. If anybody's done activity-based costing, you're familiar with that term. What are your activities? You could use it to mean tasks. As I tell my students, you can also call it the to-do list, but it's the things that you do, the activities, the work that's done to meet those objectives. If your goal is to lose weight, if your goal is to have a healthy lifestyle, and one of your objectives is I want to lose 15 pounds, that's the objective. The strategy is what? The strategy are the things you would do to meet that objective. Go to the gym 3 times a week. Eat better. Cut down on the starch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all tasks or actions or activity, whatever word you want, that are ultimately tied to the objective, which is ultimately tied to the goal, and finally the mission statement. Okay? Just some terms. Now, another way to look at these terms is through an ends, ways, and means chart. Again, I'm not putting anything on here that's new, but if you find yourself on a Tiger team, or if you find yourself on a little project team that has to write these, you come in on a Monday morning and you find out you've been assigned to the team to write your strategic objectives or something like that, and you have to come up with, you're part of a team that's trying to come up with something to answer the mail. If you're writing, if you're coming up with terms that tend to focus on the what, an accomplishment of some kind, you're probably writing a goal or an objective, or perhaps a measure. If you come up with something that tends to sound like how you're going to achieve something, then you're probably writing an initiative. All right? And then, of course, the ultimate feeder of that is the means, is your resources. So again, using the example I said, if your objective is to look good in a tuxedo for your daughter's wedding, who's getting married next May, and you go, I better drop a few pounds, then that is the overall objective. That's the what. And the strategies associated with that are the how. If you're measuring things like number of students taught in a quarter, number of organizations that are represented in our student body. I'm just using examples that I can relate to from the university. You can probably pull your own in. Those are all, you're focusing really on the how there. You're focusing on just holding a certain number of classes, but you have to go beyond that. And you have to ask yourself, well, I know there's an objective behind that. What are we trying to achieve? Increased population, broader, more in-depth student group, and so forth, that type of stuff. Okay? We're going to come back to these terms as we continue on. Now, how do you start putting all this stuff together? Well, certainly one approach is nothing more than the simple logic model. And that literally is a simple little chart. Where's my arrows? There we go. Come on. Well, there's another arrow that doesn't want to come out. There it is. I must be hitting this fine. A simple little program logic chart, logic model chart. This is nothing hard. You've seen this in Management 101 classes back in our undergraduate days. Inputs come in. Certain processes are established. Certain controls, policies are bordered around that, and outputs come out, and then the ultimate achievement is outcomes. What's the difference between an output and an outcome? Anybody want to venture? What's the difference between an output and an outcome?
An output is something you actually do. An outcome is a change that takes place in the world because of it.
Exactly. Outputs are widgets, making widgets. Teaching students, processing driver's license applications, processing immigration forms over at INS, something like that, et cetera, et cetera. Outcomes are, well, what has changed beyond that, and how are these outputs impacting that? It's harder to measure an output, but that's what GIPRA wants us to measure. That's what all of those performance management policies were attempting to be driven at. All right? Let's take another look at that process chart. This is just simply an expanded version of that. Again, I'm not going to go over it in enormous detail. Inputs can be things like time, people, money, various resources. Outputs can be, here's some examples up here, conducting meetings, delivering services, providing counseling. It just depends on where you're at. But the ultimate outcome associated with that is can be treated as either a short-term, medium-term, or long-term. These are the specific changes associated with that. All right? Now, nothing wrong with a logic model. It's something people can understand. But the logic model in and of itself is not a good way to implement a performance management system. There's not enough stuff there, if you will. A couple of decades ago, two gentlemen from Massachusetts, one was a Harvard professor and one was a consultant, named Kaplan and Norton, created something called the Balanced Scorecard. Anybody ever hear of the Balanced Scorecard? Okay. Some nods. I see some familiar faces with it. The gist of the whole thing, in a nutshell, is Kaplan and Norton said, how can you attempt to determine you are achieving this level of outcome? How are you achieving success? How are you measuring the success? In the private sector, organizations were measuring success by what? Money, profits. As long as the business of America was business, what's good for General Motors is good for the USA. All those tired cliches that came out of the 1920s and 30s and 40s. As long as business was booming, that was fine. But as we started to see in that time period that we talked about earlier, to the social revolutions of the 1960s, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, this was stirring the pot. And our customers, there's that C word, started asking questions like, you may be a good company, but are you environmentally friendly? Are you green? They've been asking that question since I was in high school. Earth Day. How long is Earth Day? Been about 30 some odd years, right? People are starting to ask, you may be a good company, I may like your clothes, but where are those clothes being manufactured? Are they made in a sweatshop in Thailand by underpaid women? Because if they are, I'm not buying your product. So a lot of social approaches and so forth and so on were stirring things up. And Kaplan and Norton were recognizing all this, and they said you cannot measure performance, you cannot determine success simply by looking at money, because it's possible you could be making a lot of money and walking down the path only to find out that the path has suddenly changed and you could go out of business very quickly. So their balanced scorecard approach, again, the first word of the balanced scorecard is balanced, so that sort of suggests what they're doing there. Second part of the word is a scorecard. I like to explain it this way. If you're a golfer, you go around and you keep score, and a standard round of golf, a standard scorecard consists of what? Just strokes. At the end of the 18 holes, you got a number. Okay, all right. How'd you do today? I shot my average or something like that. Okay, nothing wrong with that. But if you really wanted to take that a little bit farther, which professionals do, is, especially when they're doing practice rounds, well, I had so many short putts, so many of this off the green, and they've expanded that scorecard with a lot more detail, analyzing different facets of their success. So at the end of the day, they can look at that number. The overall number is still the same, but they can realize, I'm doing an awful lot of 3 putting here or something like that, and they need to work on that. Okay? Kaplan and Norton's expanded scorecard basically looked at 4 perspectives. Money was still there, of course, but they also suggested that you look at customers. There's that C word again. Customer intimacy was the term that came across. Getting inside your customers' heads. What are they looking for? What do they want? That's hard to do. How are you going to do that? You have to, first of all, identify them, and then you have to ask them. We started to see more and more things like customer questionnaires, customer surveys. Now, I know, it's 2011, and you're like I am, and you're sick of those things, because everywhere you go, would you fill out here's the one I love. You just get on the telephone with somebody and you haven't even started the discussion, and they say, you have been randomly selected to fill out our customer survey. Would you be willing to stay on the line? I haven't even started yet. So yes, we might be carrying this to a little bit more extreme, but nonetheless, the idea of determining who your customers are and asking what they want is very, very important. The internal process perspective was very important. By that, they mean business process reengineering. This is what we started seeing a lot of BPI techniques, the whole lean movement, Six Sigma movement, ISO 9000, that type of stuff. How can you make those processes more efficient and effective? And then finally, learning and growth. And learning and growth is what? Or another term for learning and growth, one I actually like a little bit more, is organizational capacity. It's looking at your organization. It's looking at your employees. With the advent of the scorecard and an emphasis on measures related to that, we started seeing more and more approaches of companies, of organizations, asking their employees what they wanted. We want a family-friendly organization here. What does that mean? It means we want daycare centers on base, in the building, or someplace close within it, so there's security issues and safety issues, but we want daycare. Daycare. I don't know of any companies that were around in the Eisenhower administration that put a daycare center associated with their, but a lot of them do today. Impartiality because of that right there, because of that area of accountability. Health, overall people's health. Do we have asbestos in a building like the EPA did that? Do you have any here? I hope not. I hope not. Are we working in an environment that's basically healthy or sick buildings and so forth and so on? We can go down the road on that, which we won't. But the point is, within each one of those perspectives, Kaplan and Norton said, write some goals, write some objectives, write some measures, write some initiatives focused on that, and then take a completely balanced approach. Okay? I'm just setting it all up with that. Now, if you look at that a little bit differently, and you just basically redo that chart in a vertical format, this is an example of the balanced scorecard for the public sector. Now, if you had a private sector scorecard, financial would be on the top. But in the public sector, it's not on the top. This is an example of the scorecard, I would say, as it was originally conceived. You'll see a lot of public sector organizations that use this model. They picked it up in 1993, 95, they developed it. You notice that what's on the bottom is the resources. Now, where I'm heading on all this, if you think I'm drifting, go back into my chart on the logic model, input, process, output. I don't like this model. I don't like scorecards that follow it this way. Why? Because they tend to, actually, could you put that back up there? They tend to view the resource block as an input. This is the input, this is the process, that's the output, et cetera, et cetera. And in many ways, people have fallen into the habit of taking the logic model and standing it on its side vertically and turning it into a scorecard, which is really not good, in my opinion. It's really not the most efficient way. Because if you do that, then you're all of these little aspects that we talked about, the initiatives, the measures, the objectives tend to be input-oriented, okay? A better way I would suggest would be where the resources is up higher, and I will show that in a slide in a couple of minutes. But I'm introducing this to you now to let you know that a lot of people do it this way, and a lot of people are very, very happy with it. And I'm going to take a few minutes now and walk you through an organization that was very, very successful about that. And actually what I would like to do is borrow my young colleague up here, who's sitting up in the front there, and ask Andrew if you would pass, see that everybody gets one of those. For those of you who are in the Ethernet, I'm sorry, I can't give you a hard copy, but this is just simply one of the slides that you will see on your screen. But for those of us here in the auditorium, I thought it would be easier to read if you had a paper copy. So I'm going to give Andrew a second there to pass that out. Thank you. Thank you, John. Okay, one of the organizations that has been very, very successful in using the Kaplan and Norton methodology, the Balanced Scorecard, in the format that I would say is the 1990s, early 2000 format, is the United States Army Medical Command. This is a very, very interesting organization to study. Because quite frankly, these were the boys These were the folks who got into the hot seat a few years ago with Walter Reed. They were crucified on the front pages of the Washington Post about their performance, about their accountability. And rightly so in many cases. Some people really deserved it. But it just goes to show you the political sensitivity that we live in, about if you don't get something right, you may wind up on the front page of the paper. So the Army Medical Command puts a lot of emphasis on a good strategic planning approach and a good performance management approach. They live this stuff. They breathe this stuff. What you're seeing here is an example of their strategy map. And you can see that it's a one-page document. It's all-encompassing. It includes their mission and their vision statement, their strategic themes, which roughly equates to goals. They prefer the term themes, and they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. Nothing wrong with that. If you want to call them themes instead of goals, that's fine. And then they have their objectives underneath it. Now, this is not exactly a scorecard, and I'll explain the difference between the two, but this is an evolution of the scorecard in something called a strategy map. But you can see that along the left side there, they basically have components that correspond to the Kaplan and Norton approach. The stakeholder and the customer, the internal process, the learning and growth, and then the resources. Now, if you follow along on here, I think you'll see where I was heading on. Look down way at the bottom there. Look what's in the color, in the green color there. These are their objectives. If you're following me, optimize resources and value, optimize life cycle management of facilities and IT infrastructure, maximize human capital. Those sound very inputty to me. They're basically, in simple terms, they're saying, give us more, or allow us to take what you've given and get everything out of it, use everything we can out of it. But predominantly it's saying, ensure we have an adequate budget, ensure we have an adequate, any kind of resources associated with it. That leads up then to the learning and growth perspective, where now they're getting a little bit more specific in terms of the organizational capacity. They want to improve recruiting and retention of personnel. They want to improve training. They want to promote and foster a culture of innovation. These are all, you see, these are all objectives that can be tied directly into the organizational capacity approach. Okay? And there would be initiatives behind these. How are you going to do that? How are you going to improve knowledge management, for example? We could drill down and find their initiatives. That, in turn, should improve their processes, improve their information systems, optimize medical readiness. You can see all that there. Synchronize Army medicine to support Army stationing and BRAC. Those are all process, clear. Gee, I can see Six Sigma things falling right out of that all the time, all over the place. And then ultimately the customers on the top. Okay?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
What is the significance of the three processes called out within the family covenant? Is that like an integration point?
Yeah, the family covenant, actually, those were ones that the Surgeon General specifically focused on in terms of the processor. And I'm going to butcher his name. It's Lieutenant General Schumacher is the current Army Surgeon General. Those were the ones that they, just within the process arena, that he felt were key and important to him. And for family reasons, improving access and continuity of care, and physical and psychological health promotion. Very, very important on that. Yes, ma'am. I think, let me stop you 1 second. I believe when you ask a question, you're supposed to go to the mic so that people can hear it online. So does that mean you don't want to ask it?
That's dated 2009. And, thank you, a little
I'm
short.
sorry.
And so was this the outcome from that Walter Reed situation? So the Army, are you saying that they weren't really focused on their vision and their mission, or enforcing their vision or their mission with good objectives, or, okay.
I wouldn't say, this
They
didn't
have
come about
performance
as a result
measurements
of,
that they weren't really trying to meet.
right. This did not come about as a result of the Walter Reed scandal. And one of the other points I was going to make a little bit later, but it's a good point now. This takes a long time. This is not done overnight. This process has been in place for, I'm going to say 10 years. I'm going to say since the early decade of the 2000s. Maybe not quite 10 years, but somewhere around the 2002, 2003. And when was the Walter Reed scandal? Just a few years ago. But the point was, when that came in, they were able to utilize this immediately and see, how can we fix it? What are the problems? What are we not measuring? It was a good visibility tool. It's not going to prevent everything. And I think the lesson to be learned there is it can't prevent all problems, but it can be used very, very quickly as a management tool to solve those problems. Good question. All right. So I just have some cool little slides here, which I like to show. MedCom uses the Balanced Scorecard as a strategic management system. It allows them to implement their management control and turn strategy into action. It follows the Kaplan and Norton approach. It's balances across 4 critical performance areas. I'm having a hard time here. Must be where I'm standing. In the customer area, as we covered, I may need some help. Can you change slides for me? I may need some help. Just, do you mind if I do that? Just say next slide. That's good. Next slide. And the learning and growth area, next slide, and the resources area. So you see this tying in again, very, very important to the term balanced. Can you eliminate a perspective? No. You really, really can't. It might be me. Maybe it's my hand. You really shouldn't. You really can't eliminate a particular perspective because, again, just like the 4-legged stool, you take one leg out and it will collapse. I mean, as some of my students want to ask that question, I always go back to them, well, what would you eliminate? Customers? That's scary. Processes? Business processes are the guts of what you do. Oh, you want to eliminate employees? Well, no, we don't want to do that. So what? Resources then? Et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. Next slide. Click. Okay, again, it's a balance between financial and non-financial indicators. Money is still there. Money is resources, budget is still a key factor, but it's just one of many. Next slide. Between internal and external constituents, you do have to know who your customers are. You do have to know who your employees are. Next slide. And lead and lag performance measures. The difference between those two is what? A lag measure is, what did we do now? Did you achieve that objective? It's a very straightforward measure that says, you said you wanted to lose weight. Did you lose weight? How many pounds did you lose? That's the lag measure. The lead measure is more predictors, more suggestions. Are we moving in the right direction? Did you fix it? Thank you, thank you. There we go. Now, again, I hinted on this earlier. There are 2 parts to a balanced scorecard, the strategy map and the supporting scorecard. What you have in your hand is the strategy map. This is the ultimate paper that strategic leaders would use as a communications tool for their organization. This is what you'd probably see in a poster. You should see this all over organizations on their bulletin boards. You should see it as a screensaver on, the Marine Corps uses it as a screensaver on their computers. You should see it on little badges here. You could have the organization's strategy map right there on the back of individuals' badges. I see that everywhere in places. General Schumacher, again, who lives and breathes this in the Army Medical Command, has this posted on the walls of his conference rooms. So I've been told. Don't know this for sure because I've never been in one of his conference rooms, but it's apparently on the walls of his conference rooms. And every time there's a meeting in which he or one of his senior level deputies is there to make some kind of a decision, they start the meeting by saying, "Where are we? Show me where we are. What is this meeting for? Are we discussing that? If you can't tie the meeting into a specific strategic objective, then why have the meeting?" Question, sir? Probably supposed to use that.
How do you get to that point where I'm sure these things exist, but at the programmatic level where it's not just jumping through hoops, but that it actually is substantively capturing what it is, the outcome you're trying to work for? Meaning, I don't know what this stuff is for our organization. I know that the overall mission, but it's not that I don't think it exists, it's that it's not relevant to the day-to-day actions in the programs. How do you connect that upper level strategic planning with the day-to-day program level operation?
That, my friend, is the $64,000 question. That, my friend, will cost you $150,000 in consulting fees, so my colleague here, Professor Hurley, and I can come in. Seriously, it's tough. It's tough. I can give you a lot of the cliche answers, which you read about in Government Executive Magazine. Start small. It's always good to start in a small organization, sub-organization, sub-unit of the organization. If you don't have this kind of a culture immediately, you're not going to start all across the organization, all across the agency. You pick your battle. You implement this somewhere. You implement it in a section that is ready for it, and then when success is there, you move it around. You evolve it through others. You definitely have to have, and again, I'm telling you what you don't already know. Have to have the support of senior leadership. You have to have a General Schumacher who says, "I want that chart in every conference room, and I want to be able to stand up and say, we're not going to have this meeting if you can't tell me how it's related in there." If you don't have that kind of stuff, it's hard to do. Sure.
You mentioned that this is a slow process and a work of close to 10 years to get something fully worked out
About that.
like this.
About that.
How do you do that in an environment where political leadership changes every 4 to 8 years,
Exactly.
And that you have to move this through several administrations if you're actually going to implement it, and then count on administrations after to keep referring to it?
Excellent question, excellent question. If the administration changes and there's a dramatic shift in the philosophy of the leader, the culture of the leader, then you have a problem. But that very issue came up right now in Army Medical Command. General Schumacher retired. I think it was 1 November, come to think of it, so he's gone. And where did his successor come from? His successor was one of the one-star generals who was underneath and who lived this and who understood it. His successor, which by the way happened to be a female Army nurse, the first non-medical corps person to hold that position. She drank the Kool-Aid, if you will. She understood it because she lived it. She would have never been put in that position where she could take on the mantle if that hadn't happened. But again, if you're not like that, if it's an environment where you just get someone fresh off the street, who comes in and says, I don't understand this, and I'm not willing to accept it, then you have some challenges. How do you deal with that? Hand-holding, grooming, education, that kind of stuff. Do the best you can. Yes, ma'am.
How you doing? I'm not sure if everybody in the room is from HUD. Is everybody from HUD?
Can you
Most of us
speak a
are.
little louder?
Everybody's from HUD.
Right.
Okay. We just went through the exercise with the new administration. Each year we have our 3 to 5 year strategic plan, but with the Obama administration and with Secretary Donovan, we just went through a revamp of the strategic plan. The strategic goals changed.
Okay.
So the strategic plan is on the web. We have all of that information there. But they went through almost a year and a half exercise, getting everybody to contribute and to determine what those strategic goals for the department were. That was the Office of Strategic Planning and Management who led that exercise.
Okay.
So we have a defined strategy plan. We have those already laid out.
Good.
So for the most part, for your question, you asked how do we know? Start from the top. If you know what those strategic goals are, then you figure out where your organization fits, figure out what it is that's aligning from the bottom up to those strategic goals.
Right.
I'm actually on the IT side, so for me, it's determining what are my application systems doing to support the strategic goals and the business. Does that help a little bit?
I know it exists. It's just on a practical level. We're just measuring outputs, just doing widgets to roll up into the strategic plan. It doesn't actually relate to. We get the mission. We know why we're doing the work, but that's not reflected in the plan. So there's a disconnect somewhere.
Right.
Even though I know
Yeah.
it exists on paper, it's just.
And it's still evolving here at HUD, I think. I think it's still evolving.
The only thing I would add is to try and resolve that disconnect. The idea is the Tier 1 scorecards, which is the overall organization, need to be cascaded down, needed to be linked to Tier 2 scorecards, which are the sub-elements, whatever you are, the branches and so forth. And then ultimately linked down to a Tier 3 scorecard, which is what? A Tier 3 scorecard is you. It's your annual performance eval or something along those lines. So, excuse me. So if you can see where your contribution ties into other people's contributions. It's the old joke. I'll end on the old line from Lyndon Johnson, who, when he was president, was walking around the Kennedy Space Center and saw the guy sweeping floors. And you've heard this line, "What are you doing?" And the man said, "Mr. President, I'm trying to put somebody on the moon." Well, I'm losing my voice, and we are out of time. So thank you very much.